Portia, welcome. Thank you for being on the call. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Great. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. One second. Everything is being a little bit slow this morning on my computer. Okay, there we go. All right, so today is our second to last session together, and it's 6th of August. I think we have another session towards the end of August, so we are looking to wrap things up. Before we dive in, just our general housekeeping rules again. Please put yourself on mute when you're not speaking. If you do have a question, feel free to take yourself off mute. If you can't get off mute, then please type the question in the chat and I can address that. And as I mentioned, we'll record the call so whoever's not able to be here in person has access to it. So the goal today, similar to what we did in our session last time, is first of all to just have a bit of an open space for everyone. We've spent the chunk of our time together going over some global frameworks on impact management. You've had a chance to listen to some speakers from the IMP, from B-Lab, from Gali, from Andy. You've also had a chance to hear about approaches that organizations such as Spring, Akina Foundation, Impact Hub, and some of the other orgs as well that are in the cohort, what their approaches have been like towards developing their own organizational impact frameworks. And so in our time left together, the goal is to really try and bring some of those ideas and actions that you have to life by saying, okay, now that we've kind of scanned out this picture, we've developed our theory of change, we've gone through the process of looking at indicators, etc. How can we now start to really construct action plans that help us either improve or start to build our impact frameworks? And so, as always, the first thing that I'd like to do is to just have an open call for any questions that anybody has or any sharing that you'd like to do on either any new progress that you made or any reflections that you have on either listening to some of the content or going through any of the material or the decks. This is just an open conversation at this stage with the rest of the time that we have together. I did put together a few slides just to tie up some of the concepts and some of the tech platforms, etc. So there's a little bit of content for us to go through, but really this is an occasion for you to bring forward any thoughts, comments, questions that you have and are looking to get some feedback or just share even. So anybody have anything to jump in with?
I can start off. So one of the things I was thinking about recently was kind of, I can't remember, it might have been Clemmy who sort of talked about it in one of her webinars about how important it is to kind of start with the questions. So like starting the whole process from the point of view of, okay, what are the main questions that the team is trying to answer? And so I'd be interested to hear from other people, like what are the questions that their organizations are trying to answer through their impact measurement, and also like how the process that you might go through to get that out of your team and make sure you're answering the right questions. Because I think when we sort of when I first kind of set up the impact measurement processes, we maybe didn't really start from that point. Like we created the theory of change and then I filled it in from that, but maybe didn't spend enough time reflecting on what are the most important things that we need to find out from this whole process.
Does anybody have any thoughts for Abby? And while you're thinking, maybe just for the benefit of anyone who's listening, to the recording as well. So the way that I understood that question, Abby, is as organizations, as we are going through this process of trying to construct and establish an impact management framework, going through the motions of doing the theory of change, coming up with the indicators, etc. You're wondering what are the ultimate sort of questions that we as an org should be asking ourselves either simultaneously or from the onset as to what we want to learn from the data and why are we doing what we're doing, if I understood correctly. And so I guess I can jump in and speak with my experience from the spring perspective. I think on the one hand, for us, it was always about, as an organization, we were created to straddle the path between impact and tech companies, because what we were seeing was tech companies trying to be more impactful and impact entrepreneurs. Oh, sorry, if someone has just got off. Sorry, Borsha, I think you are on mute. If you don't have a comment, then can you just put yourself on mute, please? Okay, thank you so much. Yes.
Hello?
Hi, yes, no.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Did you have a comment?
Okay. Basically, I missed the last two meeting, so I was really ill. So I connect with the going discussions. So I will be checking it from our group where it is like downloaded at the Slack.
Okay.
So I'll go through that first. That I joined the office recently, so I have to connect with all the materials first.
Okay, no problem, Barsha. I mean, feel free to just listen in because again, we're just going to have a very open conversation. So you don't need to have like too much of the past background. So just put yourself.
Oh, you're breaking.
I said, feel free to put yourself on mute and just listen to the conversation. You can definitely catch up on the material later. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Abby, just to get back to that. So for us, I think the genesis of this whole drive towards the creating of an impact framework was because of who we were as an organization that was trying to, as I said, bridge this gap between impact and tech entrepreneurs, especially, and here's where I think context is important, because in the Vancouver ecosystem at the time, there were either only tech incubators or only impact incubators and accelerators. And so when Spring was born, it was kind of to bridge that gap. And so the drive towards being more overt about how we were creating change and making an impact was one of the reasons was to say, hey, there's a way for purpose-driven enterprises, whether they are bricks and mortar or tech-based, for them to be thriving businesses. And by being able to showcase the impact that the companies were having and the entrepreneurs were having was a big aspect for, being more vocal about that change, basically. So I guess the questions for us from the beginning were, how can we demonstrate the ultimate change that these purpose-driven founders are having? And how can we depict what support and what having access to the network, the mentorship, the tools, the knowledge, what does that enable these founders and these businesses to achieve? And you can see that when you're, constructing the sort of surveys, etc., that you try to get that types of information, then you ask those questions, you know, like to what extent and how much, etc. But that was the sort of key driver. I think that as our business has grown, especially with a focus more on like ecosystem and advisory work, that those questions have brought into just beyond the entrepreneur to actually like other ecosystem players. But the ultimate ask is around the same theme, like how is being in our community enabling these change makers to have even deeper impact, and how can we ensure that they are more sustainable going forward as a result, or maybe not as a result, but as a function of being in our community. So I think that for me is the driving question. Clemmy, do you have any thoughts to add?
Yeah, I think it's a good challenge, like good to reflect on. I think if I think about the Arkina journey, we were most, like we do this work with organisations, but when it came to doing our own logic model or theory of change, we mostly wanted to do it in order to demonstrate our impact, which I think is common for a lot of organisations. I think if we'd asked the question, if we'd known to ask the question and we'd been more explicit about it at the start, about saying like, actually, do we also want to know whether what we're doing is working in order to refine our focus and spend more time on the stuff that works, and like invest in that stuff more, then it probably would have helped us to do through the process more, because we would have been able to say, okay, this is why we're selecting this indicator. It's not like we could have been more upfront about that through the process, and there wouldn't have been conflict between the different, not that there was a lot of conflict, but you know, like it's just good to ask that question from the start and say, we're actually committed to investing in what works. And so the indicators that we select, the kinds of outcomes that we're looking for, are the outcomes to check whether it works or not just to prove that it works.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point, because I think, and this is probably true of more traditional organizations that do a little bit of like CSR reporting as just, you know, hey, we've done this. But what we're trying to do in this exercise is to really, in this whole series, is to embed that foundation, right? And that's why it's just as important with our ventures as well, to get them to think about ultimately what is the change that they're trying to create, and then how will they demonstrate that impact.
And which of the things that we do with them work the best. Because like as an intermediary, you probably are trying a few different things. Like you might be supporting them to get investment. You might be helping them with their impact and developing their theory of change. You might be doing kind of one-on-one coaching. There's all these different activities you might be doing to support them to increase their impact. But some of those things might work better than others. And you really want to be tweaking with those things and levering one up more than the other if that's working more. So selecting indicators and diving deep in that portion of your theory of change is really valuable.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, like, you know, something that we've been saying from the start is that this is an iterative process. And so what we did 12 months ago will change because businesses change. And so the driving question may be kind of similar, but the answer to that will also reflect, you know, the context of the business will be reflected. Abby, does that help? And if you had to answer that question for Impact Hub Phnom Penh, what do you think you would say today?
Yeah, so I think that helps a lot. I mean, one of the things that, I think I noticed myself when choosing indicators, you're like, okay, this one is to help us demonstrate and this one is to help us find out. And sometimes you're like asking a similar thing in two different ways to maybe have a number that's nice to present to people and a like maybe qualitative or quantitative information that tells you something. And then also the point about kind of the various activities and finding out the different degrees of impact they might have. That's something that I don't think we do really at all, or like we're not really able to distinguish beyond kind of sort of direct feedback of like rate your mentoring and rate the workshops. How would you go about understanding the difference between the different elements that we offer and the impact that has on entrepreneurs?
Chloe, do you want to dive into that first?
Yes, I think that's about within your logic, having a hypothesis that links all the way back to your activities. So probably within your theory of change or your logic model, you'll have a hypothesis for how a particular short-term outcome will lead to a medium-term outcome, which will lead to a long-term outcome and the impact. If you can map that thread back to a particular activity, then you can test the hypothesis within that. So it might be that, say, the activity of doing investment readiness, you believe leads to them being able to pitch better, them being able to get investment. So that's quite an obvious link, and you can check that the investment readiness activity did lead to that change. It gets a little bit messier around when you're comparing like a workshop format to a coaching format where the content is actually the same. And you probably think that both things are working, and so you don't want to stop doing one of them so that you've got a pilot, a sample size that didn't receive it, and you can compare them. I imagine you won't want to go into that much detail, so you can just simply ask which was most useful for you in order to get this outcome. So still you might have two activities that are leading to a particular outcome. So if I would ask the cohort which of the activities was most useful in getting to that outcome.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think if I may add to that, if I think about this at a higher level in terms of how having an impact framework and having done the work around your logic model helps you be more strategic as well, because it's like a strategic planning tool in a way. There's one side of this that you can also see from looking at some of your operating and financial metrics. And so looking at the higher picture of, okay, so workshops contributed like 10% of our top line versus advisory, which was 60%, and then starting to dig into some of the more the outcomes that resulted from those activities. So I think it's important to link the overall sort of operational picture with what's happening with those activities, and then to link that back, because you could be, putting in all your effort on the advisory, but the results are that people are not having the best experience. And so then that gives you more of a area to dig into. So absolutely, like asking is one way, but then I think the other thing to remember is that we all tend to we shouldn't get into this sense of too much comfort around what we offer too, right? Because our audience changes, people have different preferences, and we all do this, I think, in all our work in programs where when we run something with a single cohort, then we tweak and pivot and change. And so, kind of keeping track of the different types of things that you're, offering, etc., as like, okay, potentially in this workshop, we ran it such that we did 2 workshop exercises, and then we did 1 breakout session, and kind of keeping track of what you're doing as well, I think. So you can get super granular about that as well. Does anybody else have any thoughts on the big question about why this is important, or why you are, what you would ask yourself as an organization as you set about trying to understand your impact and put together a framework in place? Anybody have any thoughts?
Sorry, I was just moving locations, but thanks very much, both of you.
No, that's okay, thank you. Okay, if no one has any other thoughts on that, do we have anybody who has any other questions, or shall we keep moving? Okay. So like I mentioned, I just put together a little bit of content, and there's one thing that I wanted to share with you in this that I've created as one of the deliverables of this project. But just to reiterate what the process has looked like so far is, first of all, we've had a chance to look at our breadth of impact in terms of some of the immediate outputs, which everyone shared. We've gone through the exercise of undertaking a theory of change and preparing a logic model for our organizations, and people have iterated, and some of you, so for example, the folks from Takhliq are not on the call because they're off this week, but we've gone through this back and forth process with them on helping them refine their overall model and zoning in on indicators that make the most sense. And then establishing a data collection framework. So again, the folks from Instellar are not on the call, but we've gone through this, again, back and forth process with them on, they already had existing indicators that they were collecting, and we've spent some time on refining some of the questions that were being asked or how they were being asked. And so in general, this is the process. So wherever you are, whether you have just started off with your theory of change, or you are at the point where you're improving indicators, you know, feel free to bring any comments or questions that you have. All right, so I just wanted to share, so as one of the deliverables of this program, I've developed a toolkit and a guide to how Spring as an organization has gone through the process of impact measurement and management. And so I'll be sharing this with everyone, but I just wanted to walk you through it. And so what I've done is I've just tried to share a little bit about our journey and what it took. If you have been participating in this session right from the beginning, this was one of the topics that we had covered in, I think it was our first or our second session. And so thinking about that question that you also just asked right now, Abby, about why we're doing what we're doing, that was the first step, right? Like, why is it important for us to have this framework in place? And then talking about, well, how do we define impact at Spring? I'm just running through this. You'll have access to it later. I just want to give you a lay of the land of how it's set up. And then I first put our theory of change as it appeared when we did it in 2018, when I produced and published our impact report. I think, as I've mentioned before on this call, that was our first foray into being open about the impact that we were creating, but I was also very transparent and clear in saying that this is like the first step towards having this framework in place. It's not as deep as it could be, and it will continue to iterate. And so our first theory of change was a little bit more high level. And so what I've done as a result of wanting to get a bit more granular this year and going forward is I've refined our theory of change to better match up with the Sustainable Development Goals. Seeing this, because you know the SDGs are this common language that we all use, and so I wanted to see a fit for combining that with our overall activities. And so this is the product of that mapping. I have refined our theory of change by having a logic model that clearly states which of the SDGs and which specific target the activity relates to, and then provided the outputs that we'll be collecting and the outcomes. And so again, you'll have a chance to look at this in more detail. But for me, going through this process, it really helped us to get more granular. And then I'm just going to open up this other doc at the same time. This is just the underlying sort of indicators, etc., that have been developed in order for us to get a deeper handle of the type of data that we're trying to collect. And then I talked about how we certified as a B Corp. As you guys know, we've been a B Corp since 2017, and we'll be recertifying next year because it's a 3-year cycle. And so there's information on that. Yes, there's also a spreadsheet that talks about the more granular details that you will see. One thing that I forgot to mention before is that given the 5 dimensions of the impact management project, in our last conversation, we did have a discussion on how to use the enterprise template that they provided, which we've tried to do, but I also simplified it by just going through the 5 dimensions. And this was important for me because, again, there's this global consensus on how impact is defined using the IMP's 5 dimensions. And so I just answered those questions and areas for Spring as an org to ensure that I was capturing all the different aspects of impact. And then one thing for everybody is that there's also, I just made a video explaining everything that we're talking about right now. And that is it for that. So the reason that was created is, as I mentioned, it's meant to be a guide for everyone who's been part of this theme to have access to understanding what has been our framework. There might be certain things in there that you'll find can be relevant for the stage that you are at. Or you might say, hey, we've done some of that, now what do we do next? It will be, I'll share it with you guys. So if you have any questions between now and our next call, then feel free. And the other reason something like that can be useful as a guide and thinking about just business as a whole is you need to have like a, and it's not only true for impact, but even for your programs, you need to have playbooks in a way that show this is how something is done, this is how this program happens, these are the steps, so that there's, first of all, like a wide understanding in the team for how things work. But then also, let's say, I have to go, like last week, I had to be in Dubai for a family health emergency. If someone needs to take care of that, then they have access to that type of information. So if you don't have such guides in place for not only the impact framework, but other things, then I encourage you to consider doing that. So I know that was a mouthful. You will have access to it. There's that guide, there's some underlying resources that it points to, and then also a video explaining the same. So I will share that with everyone in email after this call. I'm just gonna go back. And so the next thing that I had for us today is, just this question that has come up, right? Like, so why is impact management important? Measurement and management important? Thinking about, again, that big why question. And here I just put down some thoughts, but maybe before we run through them, I don't know if anyone wants to take themselves off mute and maybe answer for your organization. Why do you think it's important for us to create frameworks that allow us to better understand the impact that we're having and to communicate that? Like, what is the importance? What's the end game here? Maybe Salman from BRAC, I don't mean to pick on you, but as you guys are spinning out this new incubation unit. Do you feel like sharing why you think this is an important aspect for you guys to do?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because since we are designing a new unit, so definitely we need to, have a kind of an intensive design of the whole, project. At the same time, because it's a new team, so we also need to track back, where we are heading towards. So this sort of, impact management, toolkits and, frameworks will help us to stay on track. And also at the same time, we can always, look back and, correct, measures. So take corrective measures so that, we can always, improve our program. So since it's a new, it's a first foray for us into these, proper incubation phase. So definitely this, toolkit will help us to definitely track, be on track. At the same time, always, look for those, continuous improvement.
Perfect. So what I heard was it's a way for you to kind of have a good foundation because you're starting this from scratch, and that it will help you better track what's going on and then make improvements. Given how the unit is set up, are there any reporting requirements to because, this is part of BRAC, which is this bigger organization. Are you required to report some of this data back to the head office, or I don't know what the structure is?
Yeah, so we are thinking of a standalone unit, and for these, so there will be a kind of a so we are exploring some, donor funding opportunities. So definitely, I assume that when we are getting those commitment, so there will be a lot of, donors, kind of reporting and stuff like that. So that will be there definitely. But at the same time, for our organizations, I mean, we have some sort of separate kind of reporting mechanism. Like we have to build some annual operating plans. And also, so we will definitely fit those, impact measurements and frameworks into those so that it is aligned. So there is, for our organization, there is one department where we have to always kind of report our, program activities for 1 year. And there is a mechanism like every 6 months, you have to, present some reports and show them that how much kind of objectives have been made and stuff like that. So those sort of things will be definitely there. At the same time, as since we are also exploring some donor fundings, so we will also have to, report back to them.
Okay. And maybe while other people are thinking, can I just ask, where are you in your process right now? Because I know that we've talked about, and on the call you've had a chance to talk about your theory of change and some iterations. Where in the spectrum are you in terms of establishing a framework? And do you think it's something that you can, that will happen this year? Like, just give us a sense of your timeline on establishing a framework. Did you get the question, Salman?
Sorry?
I was just asking if you can give us a sense of where you are at right now, because you've had a chance to develop your theory of change for the organization. Have you already started to have like a system in place to like collect the data, or are you still thinking about that? And what would you need to go from that big picture to the more actual, sharing of information?
Yeah, I think the one that we have designed, so that has kind of helped us to, think of the bigger picture. And based on that, actually, so we pitched these to our senior leadership. So we got a go ahead from them in terms of these, 5-year plan and stuff like that. So now, it's time to go to granular a bit, because, that was a kind of a big picture. So right now we are doing that we created a kind of a 6 months plan. runway to launching these, unit. So one of the core component is that we will have a intensive design of the whole unit. So there we see these, theory of changes and frameworks comes into play. So that the idea is that, maybe starting from, October to, December, these 3 months, we will extensively, spend our time on these. So that's where we are right now. So we haven't, go granular on those things. So basic, those frameworks and everything is in our mind, but we will work in depth during that period.
And just maybe last question while I have you is there anything that the group can support you with between now and the end of August to help you either refine something or answer any questions? If anything comes to mind right now or in the next session, like I'm sure people would be more than happy to jump in and support.
Sure. I think we have a call on Thursday, so I think I can come up with something within these days. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so anybody else, any thoughts on the big why of why this is important? Why is impact measurement and management something that you're keen to move forward with?
I think one of a lot of different reasons for us is that we're seeing more and more requirements from funders. So as we get more of our funding from organizations like USAID or from embassies, kind of more from the grants rather than corporates, it means that they do have much stronger monitoring and evaluation requirements themselves. So and I think strategically there's this kind of desire to go more towards that avenue of funding and a bit away from corporate funding. So that means that as well as kind of meeting their requirements, we also need to have strong systems in place so that we can approach people with good proposals and things like that. So that's one of the reasons that I think it's important for us at this stage.
Clevy, do you want to share a little bit from your perspective at Arkina?
Yeah, I would like to say that the reason we and all organisations should do it is so that you can check that what you're doing is working and have more information to make better decisions to increase your impact. But I think connected to that, the less altruistic version of that is to get the data points to prove to stakeholders that you should continue to do the stuff that you believe is working. So lots of organisations that we talk to have anecdotes about fantastic things that they're doing, but they don't have that in data form. They've just got one-off anecdotes, and that's not compelling enough to an investor, to a board member, to a customer, or other stakeholders you might have, like funders. So it's sort of giving you the backup to do what you want to be doing to increase your impact, which is similar to what others have said. But I personally am excited about the potential to be able to say that bit's the most high impact bit, let's do more of that.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It is it's a mixture, right, of wanting to demonstrate how good, but also there's stakeholders that this is important to, and so I just have similar things it helps to also create new collaborations. I think there was a question from one of the cohort orgs the other day about what it was like to work with other organizations, and I think that when you enter any type of new partnership, if you have a good sense of what you're good at, what they're good at, that can also ensure a smoother collaboration. So there's new avenues of opportunity that can open up. I think the one that I added here that is important also from my perspective is accountability, because it's important for us to say the things that we're good at and to communicate that. But I think going forward, and Clemmy, feel free to add your thoughts, but I think what's kind of held back the social impact space is not enough accountability. Because 5 or 10 years ago, if you ask someone what is impact, you'd have one person saying one thing and another saying quite another. But today, with this more global consensus around some basic concepts, and more of a drive towards reporting and making information available, we are starting to be more accountable, and that I think is a good trend, and one that if we as incubators, accelerators, intermediaries also contribute towards, it will just make our space more rich. And then of course there's the whole thing about communicating your story. So those were ones from my side. Does anybody else have any other thoughts? Clemmy, go ahead.
I think they're really good ones. I think the accountability bit is important to the communities that we seek to benefit as well. Yeah. We want to make sure that the support we're getting from funders we're worthy of it. Mm-hmm. And we are understanding our impact and communicating it in a way that the community can understand as well. Yeah. So I think the impact, why bother about this stuff, there's a big communication piece, and that's not just with funders, it's with all of the stakeholders that have a vested interest in seeing us succeed. And a couple of other things I have on my list of why bother about impact. Yeah. One of them is planning. So if you've got a clear line of sight that links the activities you do to the ultimate goal that you're trying to work towards, you can plan better and track progress. It can also help you deliver better. So if you use that framework with the organisations you work with and say, this is what we anticipate your journey will look like. These are the goals we expect for you. Does that sound right? Hold us to account on those goals. Let us know where you're going, like kind of be with us on that journey and tell us what's working and what's not. That can give those organisations greater clarity on what they're working on with you, and hopefully that can increase the likelihood that they will achieve those goals, because you're both kind of taking a partnership approach in that, and it's not just you having the master plan and them not knowing what the master plan is. It helps you prove what you're doing, improve what you're doing, communicate it, measure it, partner better. It's more likely you can find aligned investors or other organisations to work with. If you've got clarity on what you're doing, you can match it up with what they're doing, and deliver better as well.
Yeah, all really helpful. Okay, so I hope that if you've been wondering why this is important, or trying to think to yourselves, okay, well, what's the ultimate goal, that you've had some feedback here about how it can support better planning, better strategic direction when it comes to planning, not only to help you plan better, but to deliver better, to support stronger partnerships, to keep us more accountable, not only to our orgs, to our but also to the communities that we serve, and of course to communicate our story more clearly. So any other thoughts from anybody? The next slide that I had is just more on some tech platforms that are out there, and this also builds, by the way, on, which is why I mentioned in the Slack message yesterday that it would be good for everyone to review the webinar that Clemmy, and I think Chris was on that one, Clemmy, with the data side of things and how to, right? And so there's some tools that were mentioned on that webinar that I recommend everybody look at. And also at the back of the slide deck, there were some fantastic resources for how to visualize data, how to create the right tables, etc. If we like, I've just hyperlinked everything so that everyone can see some of these tools that are out there. Just as some background, SOPACT is, I believe, a Bay Area based impact management platform. When we had first started this process as Spring, and I think as I mentioned on the call before, we were part of a working group organized with conveners, and SOPACT was in that working group as well. They were also just starting out. They've now become this like full suite data management platform. And one of the things with their product is that they pull from all the different metrics and indicators that are out there. So they're relevant for both for-profit and non-profit organizations. I do believe, though, it's quite expensive, and that's why it may not be the right fit for everyone. I think from what I can see, bigger organizations use that tool. But nonetheless, there's some fantastic free resources and guides that you can look at on their website. And the blogs that they produce are also helpful to just give you like a little bit of information. And from time to time, they also host free webinars and things. So it's a good resource in general. The other one, Social Suite, Vera Solutions. These are also impact data management platforms. Of course, being tech-based, they're also ones that you subscribe to or pay for. And so it depends on what the budget is. There's a recent one that I came across here in Europe. They're based, I think, out of Sweden or Norway, I forget. It's called Impact Mapper. And that's another one of these types of tools that is trying to support enterprises and investors in better showcasing the impact that they have. And there are tons out there. From my perspective, it's great to see that there are these different platforms for smaller organizations. So when Spring first started to do its impact management, we were just 4 people. And so there's no way that we could afford one of these platforms. So we still very much like a Google Sheets, Airtable type system in place, Typeform, all the surveys, etc., linked to that. But now we're at a stage where we might consider looking at one of these tools because, again, you know, like it's a different financial level that we're at. So I think the answer to whether you should explore one of these platforms is dependent on what are your needs, what does it offer you, what's your budget, how will it really help? Is it additive versus having a more basic system that allows you to still get the same type of data? So there's definitely lots that we can dig into. I just wanted to share a few so that you can see what's out there. As far as I remember, there are a few orgs within the FI program that maybe use Social Suite. I feel like YGAP is one of them. But, you know, so if there's one that you want to hear a little bit more about, then we can certainly dig into that. But this is just an illustration of some of the tools that are out there. Has anybody come across any of these tech platforms, or is it something that you would consider having for your organization? Or, you know, what are you currently doing? What do you think would be helpful for this next stage for you guys? Would you continue to have a fairly basic Excel, Airtable, other type of platform, or would you like to invest in a tech platform? And would you find it useful?
So for us right now, we use just Typeform and Excel. I actually don't even use Airtable. I'm not really sure what that is. So maybe you can share a bit more about that.
Yeah.
But it's also a little bit different for us because there's a plan from Impact Hub Global to have one of these types of platforms that would then be available to everyone in the network. So I don't know what that will use, whether it's like Salesforce or SOPACT or one of these. But yeah, I mean, I can see that would be of huge benefit because then it's all much more kind of streamlined. But for individual impact hubs, they would never be able to kind of have the resources to implement it on their own.
I think that's the thing. It boils down to the resources, but also the added benefit. Just before anyone else has thoughts, Abby's question around Airtable. So Airtable is, I guess for me, the best way to describe it is, again, it is a tech tool. It's kind of like an upgraded version of a spreadsheet, in the sense that it allows the user to create different, so it's effectively, you'd start out, let's say, with a big database of information, and then there's different ways to slice and dice that information such that you can look at, depending on the parameters and criteria that you set up for a specific cohort. Let's say you can see it you can filter it by different views. At the same time, it also has links with Typeform and it has its own survey question capability. And so let's say you began the new cohort, you could ask them the questions, and then that feeds directly into the Airtable. And so I'm not doing a very good technological job of explaining how it works, but I know that it's a good platform because it allows for really easy visualization. You know, if you were to create like a pivot table in Excel, Airtable does that for you without having to create that necessarily. And pivot tables can be really useful to see information in different ways. I'm pretty sure that the org in Stellar uses it because we've had a conversation on that. And I think, Abby, if I'm not Clemmy, sorry, if I'm not mistaken, you guys also had it in your list of resources. Is that one that Akina as well uses?
We're not using it, but we did list it in the resources.
Okay.
We've kind of had but we're not using it ourselves.
Okay, so yeah, but as Spring, we definitely do use it, and it has been helpful for us to see our different client groups and look at programs, and again have this functionality to ask, integrate the surveys, etc. So it's another tool that's out there. It just depends on whether you think something, and that's, I think, true of all technology. Like, does it add, or is it just another tool that you start to have that just complicates things? So does anybody else have, Salman, did you want to add anything from your perspective?
No, but I mean, since we were also using those in Excel sheets, but also we are also thinking of, since we are also working with Wheel Group, so they also have some sort of a separate, data management, software in place. So we'll see that we might get some sort of access to that, but not now. Okay. At certain stage. But right now we are, recording those data in Excel. Okay. But yeah, we definitely explore these sort of new technologies to streamline our work.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much that one can do in Excel. So let's not, we shouldn't discount it completely. I think, again, it depends on the stage that you're at, the volume of data. That technology should only be something that you use that makes it more efficient, streamlines, etc. It's in budget, so there's definitely other tools out there. Does anybody else have any other thoughts? So if not, I just wanted to remind everyone about certain resources. And again, these are all hyperlinked, but I'm just going to share that for a second. So we had created this shared project plan right at the beginning of the theme. And so I just want to point everyone back in the direction of the resource tab, because that has other reports for you to dig into. It has stuff from Acumen, from, there's some relevant articles as well. And so that's just a place you can go if you want some more information. I also added some of the tools that Akina and Clemmy and Chris pointed in their webinar on data management, because I thought that there was some really interesting things with respect to visualizing or using pivot tables. There's a link here as well to Airtable so everyone can see. The one thing I forgot to add, by the way, is that with all of these tech platforms, you can always arrange a demo. And so because they're in the business of selling you a product, they're more than happy to set up a demo. So they may not show you the full functionality of it, but it can give you a better feel. So, you know, definitely consider doing something like that if you wanted to get more information.
And Sana, I would just add, as think about which platform to use, or whether you use Excel or something more rudimentary or more sophisticated, consider the thought that less can be more. And so just like we were saying, think about the questions that you're trying to answer when you're designing your framework. Also think about what insights you're going to want to gather at the end, and make sure that whichever platform you select actually takes you through right to the end point. It's not just really clever at collecting a heap of data, but then you won't have the capacity to analyze it. And so you'll just have a whole lot of data that you can't do anything with.
Yeah. Yeah, no, completely. Usability, and does it actually help you reach the end purpose that you're looking to do? Because again, and you know, like I actually, this reminds me of a conversation that I had a few months ago with someone who is a monitoring and evaluation. She's been doing this for like 20 years. And yes, they have platforms, but she said, hey, we still just use Excel because there's so much I can do in it. And so I guess there's no right answer for every org. There's different things that are valuable for where you're at. But again, I love that less is more, because choose what's simple, but also what enables you to continue to do this, rather than to start like with tons of information and then start to stutter in terms of what you do with it next, or what it's actually helping you understand. So the simpler, the better. And I mean, at this stage, the other thing that I wanted to just, yeah, of course, yeah.
With Excel, because I know that I'm sure there's so much it can do that I'm not aware of or currently not doing. Do you guys have any like resources that could help with the sorts of analysis that we would be doing on surveys and things, to make sure that we're kind of using that functionality? So like one example would be kind of comparing using pivot tables, or also comparing the impact programs have on entrepreneurs over time, like maybe slightly more complicated analysis that we can do in Excel but might not be aware of how.
Is there an Excel wizard on the call?
That's a really good question, and I wish I could point you to the resource. I feel like there are those wizards around, and that's how I've always done it. I've drawn on those people, and there's kind of like the people that are super expert, but then they're not very good at reducing down their knowledge into a easy to use guide. So if anyone else has one, I'd love to see it as well.
No, okay. I mean, I think so. For instance, when it comes to more qualitative data, like if you use Typeform, then of course it gives you like the chance to download the reports, etc., and then you can bring that into Excel and do your own comparisons. If it's helpful, I can certainly look at any. I can maybe add some resources that are more specific to Airtable and Excel. And even if you wanted to try out Airtable, Abby, you can do a trial version and see how it goes. But I can look at some resources, but I think you're right, Clemmy. It just depends on who knows how to use a certain function a little bit better. And I mean, Abby, the only thing I'll say is like, just try and experiment a bit with a few of the functions to see what, you might find some own tricks basically. So, look, pivot tables are good to get comfortable with. Sorry, Clemmy, go ahead.
My other advice with Excel is, again, less is more. So if you get the basics right on Excel, like you make sure that you've got clean data and you've got clear headings that facilitate collection of clean data, then that's half the battle. Like the challenge with using Excel is that it doesn't get updated frequently, and that can be as simple as adding another column that encourages you to write down the date that you've collected that particular data. So Excel can be really overwhelming, but if you use a tool that and if you use it in a common sense way and make sure that you've clearly communicated the process through the use of headings and tabs and hyperlinks, then it's a much more useful tool. If you've got all of that set up perfectly and you've got clean data going in, then sometimes pivot tables are the only tool you actually need, I find.
Yeah. But I'll definitely see if we can find some more resources for that, Connie, for that, Abby, sorry, on, yeah, any hacks that are out there, because there's definitely stuff that people, I'm sure, leverage.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And then, yeah, just to wrap up, the only thing that I have left on this mini deck is that, yes, today's session is, as we've had an open conversation on where we're at and what are some of the remaining questions. Our next session will be our last, and it is our synthesis session. It's just an occasion, again, for everyone to bring any reflections or bring any burning questions, or if you have done some of the mapping and you'd like some feedback, maybe send it to us in advance of the call, and then we can have more of a discussion during the call. That would be helpful. It's on August 27th. It's at the same time. So that, I believe, is in like 2.5 weeks. So as I mentioned, I'll share that guide that I created as part of this project as well. But yes, we are on the final a final leg of this journey with you all, and I hope that it has been constructive in helping you to either start this whole journey of impact management or refine it a little bit more, get some ideas about what might be useful for your organization. And I just, Clemmy has been on the call while driving as well, and I just want to appreciate the fact that you have access to us between, of course, now and the end of August as we wrap up. So do bring any questions or anything that you have, and you just want to get some feedback. We're here for you. It's not to say that at the end of August you can't reach out. Of course you can. You can always email us and have time to chat and speak, but we, as with regards to this theme, it will be wrapping up at the end of the next session. So anyone?
Sana?
Yeah, please, thoughts, come, go ahead.
Can I ask quite a little bit basic topic again?
Of course, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm kind of like me and Siap team, and having like, we're trying to setting up our metrics as an accelerator.
Yeah.
Like I have kind of question about how our attribution to the changes of each of the founder that goes to our incubation. It's like our founder goes through only like 3 months program. That's where we engage highly intense with them. But after that, it's kind of like doesn't have quite strong engagement. It's just like because they are an alumni to us, there's no structural program. And so like when I'm trying to think more about the metrics that try to be more like to outcome from like just an output that the output of the program is like simple, like they are launching the product and the product have at least quite a valid business model. But aside from that, after 3 months, like I want to see ideally, like I want to see like maybe they have sustained their business after 1 year, or they have increase in revenue. But when I'm trying to measure that, I feel like there's some kind of challenge about do the engagement. Back to the symbol of business, it needs more cost to do the engagement for the alumni, which the alumni doesn't pay us, like there's no revenue for cost if we want to invest more to the alumni. So we want if we want to achieve contribute more to their changes after boot camp. So like I want to ask you about how maybe the spring process about after the program. How do you keep contribute to the change of the founders, and if we doesn't create quite structural program, how do we keep measuring like our maybe like after they goes through our bootcamp, they meet others program, and maybe they make changes or goes through changes because of that program. Not as like how to keep the attribution fair to if we don't create a structural program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for asking that question. Before I provide my thoughts, my question to the other cohort members that are online is, do you have the same challenge where you have founders that go through a program and you know, they have a good experience and everything? How do you continue to understand the impact that they're having beyond the program? And if so, how have you been dealing with that challenge?
Does that mean the impact that the entrepreneur is having, or the continued kind of impact that we've had on the entrepreneur? So like, are they still growing their business, etc., beyond the program, or what impact are they having themselves?
It's a good question, qualifying question, Abby, and it might be both.
Yeah, but mostly for me, it's like the changes in the entrepreneur itself,
Yeah,
because it's like it's for a theory of change for us, the accelerator, right?
Yeah.
Because our changes is the founder become grow. Yeah, so like that's what I want to know.
So for us, we do something quite specific. Like we have our Hub Entrepreneurs Club, which everyone who has been on one of our kind of incubation or acceleration programs before, they get free access to join that. They have to kind of basically elect to join it, and the only requirement is that they continue to fill in our impact surveys. So rather than the payment, that's kind of like their entry ticket. So at the moment, for example, we have about 120 that are in the Hub Entrepreneurs Club, and we offer them mentoring and masterclasses every 2 weeks. And then we send out kind of biannual, quite a long, well, like a sort of 20-minute survey that they have to complete. And then it means that we can continue to measure the things that we care about, even like a year or 2 years after they were actually on a program. So it's our way of keeping our alumni in our community, basically, so that we can still track those things.
Thank you, Abby. So, but how do you cover the cost if Yeah.
I guess we subsidize it from other programs. So at the moment, the Hub Entrepreneurs Club in itself is not funded, but the way we've done it has been quite streamlined. So it just involves getting a speaker in every 2 weeks and then matching people with the mentors that we kind of fund through the programs, because they also require mentors. But moving forward, we're looking to have that hub, now that we've kind of built it up, we're looking to get funding actually specifically for the Hub Entrepreneurs Club. So I think up until now, it's been just subsidized by our other activities, but yeah. And we also include it when we kind of pitch to people who are paying for programs. It's a real benefit if they see, at the end of the slides, it's like, well, it doesn't finish after 3 months. We have this Hub Entrepreneurs Club. All of the people on the programs will then get to join that. That's a real perk as well for the funder to know that the help that they're getting doesn't just end after 3 months. So I think it's also a benefit for the funder as well. So it might mean that we can charge a little bit more. Yeah.
I think Salman, you wanted to add something as well. Thanks, Abby, for that.
Yeah, so basically, since we are quite new in this space because we ran some innovation challenges and stuff like that, and after that we funded some of our teams. So what we are seeing that there are some specific areas where these teams kind of struggle. I mean, in terms of doing market research, in terms of having a proper bookkeeping systems and stuff like that, and at the same time they have to also look for those B2B clients. And also, so these are some of the challenges. So what we can address, like if we can kind of come up with some de-risking elements, that okay, these are some of the milestones or some of the gaps these teams have, and then after 6 months and 1 year down the line, we can see and track the progress on those elements, that whether this team has improved on their abilities to attract more partners, or is the team they have done well in terms of their financial reporting and stuff like that. So that is something we are observing in our teams. So we will definitely focus on those gaps and try to measure specifically that okay, on these fronts whether kind of there is an improvement. So in our theory of change, some of the things were a bit broader, and as you gave us some advice that okay, how can we go granular, I mean how can we make it more specific. So those, when we are going to design these, we will definitely take into account those aspects, some broader aspects, so that we can always go back to our entrepreneurs and see what is their what is their improvement. And another thing I would want to highlight, that while working with Vilgo, they have a model called DP, like diagnostic panel. So the thing is that an entrepreneur take a kind of a control session with some of the key stakeholders to identify some of the risk elements, some of the challenging elements, and based on that they create a kind of a milestone, that okay, in this way we are going to achieve. So that is kind of helpful in a sense that you understand that okay, what are the kind of areas of improvement, and based on that you can do a lot of follow-ups, that okay, whether they have improved on this front and stuff like that. So that is a kind of a very good starting point for a kind of an incubator, to understand those broad areas where they need improvement, and then you need to always check back and see whether there is improvement or not.
Yeah, thank you both for those responses. So I think, Victor, from what both your peers have shared, there's a way to have it a bit more milestone based, where you're tracking for before and after and beyond sort of pictures. So that can be helpful to understand, okay, these specific cohort got access to these types of things. These were the areas that they were working on. And so when you check back with them in 6 months and 12 months, then you can identify along those core areas, and thus be better able to say, okay, as a result of having access to BRAC or to CIAP, these areas were focused on, they continue to improve, etc. So I think like having that sort of targeted approach based on milestones is one way to get more granular. And then what Abby mentioned as well, with having a way to engage alumni in a community that ensures that they see longer term value, is the way that they are able to get more data from people. Because if as a founder, you go through a program that maybe lasts 3 or 6 months or less, but you know that you have continued access to the team, to the mentors, to the network, filling out a survey that shows the quality of your experience is a small sort of ask, it sounds like. So having that engaged community is definitely another way to do that. From our perspective, it is similar, I would say. I think that over time, as I think I mentioned before, like we've become more focused on the programs that we offer as an org. So right now, one of the big programs that's left is our investment readiness roundtables. And then there's our startup visa program. With respect to the roundtables, because they're focused on fundraising and it's focused on supporting impact entrepreneurs, excuse me, to raise equity, the stage of these businesses are such that they are either gearing up to raise capital or they are in it and we're supporting them. And so their connection with us is, of course, to continue to help them in that process. I have to say that when we worked with very early stage businesses, it was very hard to get continued data beyond, let's say, 6 or 12 months, because if you have a sort of super pre-incubation type program, it's the chances of that founder still being in business in a year are in general probably low, right?
That's the big problem.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the stage of the entrepreneurs that you're at. My only advice on that, Fikber, is that it's just important to be transparent. So when you are talking about the impact that your program creates, if you are very clear in stating that for this specific year, we had 2 cohorts that were of this early stage and we had 50 entrepreneurs, but we only had 10 people respond to all our information. Just being clear about where that information is coming from is important, because you're also not painting a picture that, you're painting a realistic picture. And I think that if you start to realize that the super early stage entrepreneurs you're not able to track them on a more longitudinal basis, then maybe the impact that you can showcase is more from a qualitative perspective. So through more storytelling, for instance. So I think that you have to, and what I mean by that is, so for example, you can, show more how going through a pre-incubation program or an incubation program help that particular founder develop more entrepreneurial skills. Those entrepreneurial skills will last them whether they do this business or another business, but you can talk about that through maybe interviewing them or through having some quotes that they share. So it doesn't all have to be just only quantitative is the message there, I think.
And on that note of the qualitative, like can you show the example, like a good metrics and how to collect the data? Like maybe like if I want to measure the entrepreneurial knowledge after the bootcamp, like that's what I'm afraid, that I'm not being fair about attribution, right? Because oftentimes knowledge maybe can gain much more wider than just our bootcamp. Maybe they learn it from internet. So like I'm afraid that when I ask my alumni 3 months after the program, and I try to collect the data about their entrepreneurship knowledge, I kind of hard to find the justification that their knowledge is gained from only us. Like I want to know like how we justify the measurement of that, like very kind of qualitative skill,
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've had this conversation right from the beginning, this whole notion of contribution versus attribution. And here I will point you in the direction of definitely the impact management project, because there's some good resources there to help you think through that. I think if, again, like harping on the transparency element is important. So, like, and I'm going to give the example here of Vancouver. There's like one, I should say, darling social entrepreneur that is a very important part of the Spring Network, because she did our pre-incubation program that led to her having a pop-up shop for her zero waste grocery, which now is the only, at the time at least, was the only zero waste grocery in the West Coast. But her business and her team, they went through 2 other incubation programs with other impact incubators and accelerators. So there will always be other avenues where people improve, get knowledge, etc. When we talk about, so for example, that person is showcased in our impact report, where I've asked the founder, like, so of course you've been through other programs, but what is the particular way that being part of the Spring program and being part of our network, so asking a more direct, pointed question in that case was helpful to get her to say, okay, well, yes, there are other factors that contribute to where we are today, but there are some specific features about my experience with Spring and with the team that are unique. So I think by highlighting in this specific example those experiences, we're able to say, hey, so this person has such a unique aspect of going through our program, and here's how we can highlight that. We're not discounting, we're acknowledging that there are other factors, but this is one of those. So again, I think like asking the question in a way that helps you understand their unique experience, but then also acknowledging that there are other factors, and being clear about that.
All right. Yeah, that's quite clear. Thank you, Sana.
No problem. And I think, Clemmy, you had some thoughts maybe to add.
I would just reiterate the point I think I've made before about the framework that says the first outcomes that happen because of what you do are the outcomes that you control. The next ones are the ones that you influence. And finally, there are outcomes that happen that you're interested in. And those final outcomes, you don't necessarily need to have contributed to or solely caused, but you can still have a line of sight to those outcomes. So those might be the outcomes that the social enterprises are achieving themselves. And if you don't have them as part of your theory of change, then you don't have any ability to check that they are happening. I think you can get concerned with the contribution thing, and so you say, oh, well, a lot of other things have contributed to that change. It's the social enterprise itself. We can't claim it. We won't even include it in our story. There's a risk in that if you don't do it, maybe those social enterprises aren't having any impact at all. And if you haven't had a line of sight to it, you haven't kept watching what they're doing, then you don't know the full story, and you don't know whether what you're doing is working or not. So don't get so consumed by the contribution issue that you stop watching the important stuff.
Yeah, no, really, really good point. Okay, well, we have about a minute or so left in the call. Does anybody else have any questions or comments that come to mind?
No, thank you.
Pleasure. Okay, so on that note, as I mentioned, this is our second to last call. We'll have one more in about 2.5 weeks. That is a similar sort of structure. It's a bit of a synthesis call, so we'll just tie up all the loose ends. If you have any material that you would like some feedback on from either Clemmy, myself, or anyone in the group, feel free to share. Ask your questions in Slack or email, however works best for you. I'll be sending out an email just with some of the guides that I pointed to later on today or tomorrow at the latest, and so you'll have that. So feel free to review and send over any thoughts or comments. Thank you to all of you for spending the last 90 minutes with us. Thank you for good conversation. And Clemmy, it's 8 o'clock, so we should let you go and have some dinner, and appreciate you being on so late.
Thank you, Sana.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Sana and Clemmy.
Take care,
Thank you.
guys. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.